In 2012, 2 families left the city along with the conveniences of modern American living. It's today that these 2 families have relocated themselves in the mountains of the American Ozarks to build for themselves a more sustainable and fulfilling lifestyle.
We are American Homestead!
This week on An American Homestead, it's time to harvest our potatoes. We did really well on the spuds this year, and we need to make sure that we can preserve the harvest to feed our family during the coming winter. Thanks for watching, and be sure to visit us online at anamericanhomestead.com. So this is one of our 3 potato beds, and the vines have died back. It's time to harvest. So it's time to dig this up and see what's here. And we planted about 25 pounds or so of potatoes this year. And last year I think we planted less than 10 and got about 35 pounds, 38 pounds in yield. And so that wasn't bad, but this year I wanted to double or triple our efforts. So we had a lot more potato beds, planted a lot more potatoes, and over the course of time, basically put a lot of dirt, which is compacted down around the beds. And so there's plenty of room for them to grow under here. So I'm just really interested to see what we get this year and what our yield's going to be. I'm hoping it's going to be significantly more than what we planted, because really it's potatoes that are so important to get you through the winter, to have that starchy vegetable, root vegetable, that provides so much energy and sustenance for you during the winter months. And so potatoes are very important. So let's go ahead and see and dig this up, and let's see what we got. That is the first shovelful. Okay, so after digging up this bed and this bed, this is what we got so far. We have 1 6.5 gallon bucket full, and another 6 gallon, well, it was a 6 gallon bucket and another 6 gallon bucket half full. So that's what we've got out of 2 grow beds, this right here and that over there. We still have this one to go. This one's a little overgrown with some weeds, but we'll see. I'm sure we're going to be able to overflow that bucket, finish that bucket off, and probably start a new one. So that's a lot of potatoes. We're looking really good here. I'm really excited about this year's harvest. So what you see here is our potato harvest. We did really good this year. We got just under 100 pounds, around a little over 90 pounds of potatoes. We got really good sized eating potatoes, and a whole lot of also seed potatoes that we can use for seed potatoes next year to start our next crop. And so last year when we planted potatoes, I planted about 7 or 8 pounds worth of seed potatoes, and I got about 30 pounds. This time we planted about 25 pounds, and we got about 90, a little over 90 pounds. So not bad. I think next year we may even try to increase that just a little bit more, but I think this will be enough to get us through the winter and into next spring. So we'll have to see. We even still have some potatoes left over from what we canned from last year. So overall, not a bad harvest. I'm pretty excited about, the amount of food and potatoes we'll be able to put up for the winter. And so something we've been kind of researching, and what it seems to be a whole lot of speculation out there of different ways to do this, is how to preserve your potatoes the natural way. And there's people who, you got to build these boxes, these straw boxes, You need to build a root cellar. I have explained in past videos we can't build a root cellar here because the ground level is just, the water table is way too high here. As soon as we dig a hole, it fills with water. And so we're on a mountaintop, and we're still, there's just a seepage spring here up at the top of this mountain. And so I can't do that. So we're experimenting with some ideas, but I don't want to lose a crop while I'm experimenting. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to can most of these, just to make sure we don't lose the crop. And then we'll experiment as well with some of these potatoes, especially the seed potatoes, because we're going to try to keep these for next year's planting. And so I think we're going to go ahead and preserve these, about 90 pounds worth, a little over 90 pounds. We'll can most of these and try to experiment with some ways, maybe a straw box, where we can put these in a box and layer the potatoes and put straw over the top of them, or a sawdust box where we can put layer the potatoes inside of a box and put sawdust down over the top of them on the layers, and then preserve them that way. We may try to put these inside the house underneath the bed. We need to keep them in a place where they won't freeze over the winter. And so there's just different options we're going to try and see what works. Here's the deal. You got to experiment. People will comment all the time on our videos, hey, you got to do this or you got to do that. And my question is, have you tried that? Have you done that? Have you experimented that with your idea and tried it yourself? Because a lot of people, what they do is they just read online what someone else has tried or what someone else says has worked, and in reality the person they have read hasn't even tried that idea themselves. And that's what we have discovered a lot, in doing these things and trying and just actually going ahead and experimenting and doing things on our own, that what people say works doesn't exactly work when you put it into practice. And so what I would suggest you do is that you try something and then experiment yourself so that you know what works. You had the experience yourself of trying it and making it work. So that's what we're going to do. There's our potato harvest. I'm excited about what this is going to mean for us over the winter. We got a lot of food here for the winter. These are, if you're wondering what kind of potatoes these are Kennebec potatoes. They're really good for mashed potatoes and really creamy potato. And a friend of mine recommended, last year we grew Pontiac, and a friend of mine recommended these. And I've tried these before, and they are really creamy, very delicious, and so very good for mashed potatoes. And I love mashed potatoes and gravy. So these are Kennebec potatoes. Did a pretty good harvest this year. Again, we planted about 25 pounds and pulled out just under 100 pounds, a little over 95 pounds of potatoes. And lots of seed potatoes for next year, along with a lot of good-sized eating potatoes. All right, there you go. There's our potato harvest.
Getting ready to do some canning today, and we're going to can a lot of potatoes, and part of that job is to get the jars ready, and I'm doing it this morning. This afternoon we will prep the veggies, get them in the jars, and then after the sun drops below our trees in back of the house and we have some good shade, then we'll go outside and get our jars in the canner and do some canning. It's an all-day process, just because, it takes a long time to prep the veggies. That's probably the biggest part of canning, is just the washing, the cutting, the getting in jars. That takes the longest time. But this morning I'm washing the jars and getting them ready. Most of the instructions you'll see online when you research canning will talk about washing and sterilizing your jars in a dishwasher. So that's probably the easiest method, right? Well, of course, that's not in my realm of possibility, but I just wash them in the sink. I get my water really, really hot so that, I can barely touch it. I'm used to hot water though. My hands are used to hot water. And so I'll get it really, really hot and wash my jars in the sink. And I haven't had a problem. It works really good. Works just fine. So I'll just drain them here in my dish drainer. And I have way too many for my drainer, so when they're pretty much dry, and they dry really, really fast this time of year because it's so hot and the water is really hot. So I'll just move them over and set them on my towel. So a lot of people are confused about how you need to keep your jars hot before you put your food in your jars. That is not necessary when you're doing pressure canning. Potatoes will be pressure canned. It is required that you pressure can your potatoes for food safety. So I will just pack my food in room temperature jars, get the lids on, put them in the canner, and the pressure canning really does get all the bacteria out. It gets super, super hot. If you're doing water bath, yeah, it's a good idea to keep your jars warm if you want to do that. It's not necessary when you're doing pressure canning. And I have a lot of jars, so by the time I get all my food in my jars and then back into the canner, they've cooled off anyway. The pressure canner takes the work out of it, so you don't have to keep your jars hot while you're getting your food in. The Ball Blue Book is really the biggest authority, I think, on the instructions for canning. They just redid their instructions, I think it was this last year, and saying that you do not have to sterilize your jars first. If you're pressure canning, you do not have to sterilize your jars first. Just make sure that they're clean. You've washed them. There's no food bits hanging on. Your jars are in good shape. They're not cracked. There's no nicks in the sides. Things like that. That's what you want to look for. And then put your food in, put your lids on. You don't even have to boil your lids when you're pressure canning. So that's a really big help too. Just put your food in, put your lids on, get them in the canner, and make sure you do it for appropriate amount of time for the food at the appropriate amount of pressure for your altitude. Our altitude is over 2,000 feet, so we do everything at 15 pounds of pressure. So that's just a little tidbit of information I've found over the last year. It really has made canning a lot easier. I was following the old instructions for a while and just realizing I can't keep this up because my canner is so huge. Like I said, by the time I pulled my jars out, got my food in, got my jars back in the canner, the ones that I had taken out towards the end were cool anyway, right? I mean, they don't stay warm when you have 32 pint jars. The ones that I pulled out at the beginning, they were just not warm by the time I got my food in anyway. So the new instructions make a lot of sense to me, and I haven't had a problem. All my completed jars of canned potatoes. You'll see that I have some pints. I also have some quarts. Someone asked why I can in pints. It's kind of funny because when you normally see a lot of produce put up, it's primarily done in quart jars because you can fit more in a quart jar versus a pint jar, and so it seems more likely and more common for food to be put up in quarts versus pints. So why do I do pints? Well, I don't have refrigeration. A lot of you know that, right? So when I can, I deliberately think about what I'm going to use my produce for. So A lot of my potatoes I will use for mashed potatoes. My quarts I'll use for mashed potatoes. If I'm making a bigger meal, I'll use my quarts. My pint I plan on probably using for a lot of soup or stew, things that I will be adding in other ingredients. So maybe I'll have some deer chunks that I'll put in with my potatoes, some canned carrots I'll put in, onions, maybe some celery to make a good stew for the winter. So I don't need a whole quart of potatoes to make a stew. We do eat a lot of stew and soup in the wintertime. So, and I don't like to have leftovers sitting around. Without refrigeration, food doesn't last very long. So I make sure I don't have a lot of leftovers. In the wintertime, we can just sit it outside, and that's fine. But even then, I also always make sure that I keep in mind our portion sizes when I'm canning.
Okay, so you saw that we took most of our potatoes, most of our harvest, a lot of the bigger potatoes, and we put those into canning jars and canned those, and they're up for the winter, and that's going to last us a long time through the winter. But we still have other potatoes. And, you know, one of the things we're always trying to experiment with around here is trying to figure out how people a long time ago tried to preserve their food without refrigeration, even without canning, because really canning is sort of a modern way to save food and preserve food. They didn't have that really 200 years ago. So how did people preserve food? Well, a lot of times root vegetables like this, they would take these and try to preserve them throughout the winter by putting them somewhere dark and allowing them to go the winter somewhere cool and dark, and just preserve them that way, and then take them and eat them and use them when they needed them. And so how did we do that? We can't build a root cellar here, not without some major construction and engineering, because we have a very high water table. As soon as we dig a hole, it fills with water. So we're going to try some other options. And it's always an experimentation. I really encourage people to experiment with certain things, try new things, see what works, but don't put all your eggs in one basket. Let's just say, for example, we took our entire harvest and tried to preserve them with the method that I'm about to show you, and it failed. We'd be without food for most of the winter, and that's really not good. We don't want to do that. So what we're going to do is we canned a bunch of them, and we're going to now experiment with a way to preserve this food. And that is this. We have a lot of good-sized potatoes here left over, some good potatoes in here, in this bucket, some of the good-sized potatoes that we're going to keep, good-sized spuds. And we're going to take these and put these inside of a box that we layer with sawdust. So we're going to basically take sawdust, put it in the box, put these potatoes, put a layer of potatoes in there, and then put another layer of sawdust on top of that, and then layer these boxes with our seed potatoes that are really going to be for next year's growth, next year's planting, so we can save the seed potatoes and save other potatoes that we would also eat. And so we're going to try this and see what works. I've heard of people using hay, where they line hay in a box and then layer their potatoes in hay and then close it up to keep the light from it. We're going to try sawdust. That we have an abundance of sawdust here on the homestead that we get from a local wood mill, sawmill, and we use that for our compost and for our composting toilets. And so we have an abundance of this. It's very cheap, very easily to acquire. And so we're going to go ahead and take that, try this experiment where we use that to preserve the potatoes, and then see how it works. If it doesn't, we'll figure out a different way, or maybe we'll adjust to get better as time goes on. So it's all a continual experiment that we try to play with to make sure we can preserve our food through the winter. So we're going to go ahead and try that. Let's go ahead and put these in the boxes and layer them up, and I'll show you how we're going to do it. Okay, so I got 2 boxes full of potatoes layered in sawdust, wood chips, and I've got a lot more to go. Most of these will probably be used to be eaten because they're more bigger than some of the others. A lot of these other ones, most of the ones I have left are basically seed potato size. They're about the size that I purchased when I originally planted these. And so we're going to keep these potatoes for seed potatoes. They'll be boxed separately and kept over the winter and for next spring when we go ahead and it's time to start planting potatoes again. Now it should be noted that Kennebec potatoes, which these are right here, this is the Kennebec variety of potatoes, and Pontiac potatoes, which we planted last year, are the best kind of potatoes for long-term storage. At least that's what I've read online. And so if you're interested in trying a variety of potatoes that you can keep for long-term storage, that you don't have to maybe worry so much about, at least this is what I've heard. I haven't done, I don't know anything until I've tried it myself. But it seems basically from online reports that Kennebec and Pontiac potatoes are the best kind of potatoes to go ahead and keep and just save for long-term storage. I'll also tell you that we had some Pontiac potatoes that we planted last year, harvested last year, and I did not really store them like this at all. I just put them on our pantry shelf in the back, and they lasted all, and in fact, they're still back there. They're just now starting to sprout. So they did keep very well. This year I'm going to try Kennebec because they're really good for mashed potatoes. I've had these before and they taste really yummy. And so I think I'll like the taste of these better. In fact, I know I like the taste of these better than the Pontiacs. So anyway, you want to choose a variety that has good long-term storage potential, and supposedly the Kennebec is one of those varieties that you can get. So again, the rest of these are going to be seed potatoes, most of them, and we'll try to eat on these most of the winter. We got a lot of potatoes put up for long-term storage. Really excited about that because we're doing this for all of our produce that we're pulling out of the garden. This is just potatoes. We're doing this for tomatoes and carrots and everything we're pulling out. Trying to find self-sustainable ways to make this stuff last in long-term storage so that we can eat on it over the course of time, and not have to expend a lot of energy doing so. So anyway, that's what we're doing for the potatoes. Well, it is the dog days of summer, and it is super, super hot, and we're trying to do as much harvesting as we possibly can, putting up as much produce and food as we can. But, with the dog days of summer, also, with the heat, also comes the time for the county fair. And if you remember last year, we had a great time going to the county fair and submitting a bunch of different items to the fair to be judged, and we came home with a bunch of blue and red ribbons. And so we're going to try that again this year. And so the homestead right now is really busy getting ready for the county fair and getting some projects done so that we can submit these things, canned goods and produce from the garden and other projects as well that we're going to be able to show you next week. So stay tuned. Guys, listen, if you like this show, if you like the episodes that we're putting out each week, please feel free to share the videos on Facebook with your friends and family, share them on Twitter, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. All right, guys, we'll see you next time on American Homestead.